Right, it's 2 o'clock. This is Kylie Dancy, council staff, and we have a couple other council staff on the webinar as well, Mary Sabo and Brandon Muffley, as well as our executive director, Chris Moore. I'm going to be walking through a presentation on this issue, and we'll kind of give some overview of this policy, but Brandon or Mary, do you have anything that we need to cover before we get started on this? Are we good to go?
From my perspective, I think we're good to go. Just wanted to say thanks to everyone for taking the time to be on here today.
Yeah, the only thing for me, Kylie, once people, make comments, just to please state your name and affiliation, just so that we can get all of that information down if you decide to make public comment.
Yes, thanks, Brandon. So again, I'm Kylie Dancy, council staff, and thank you all for being here today on our webinar to collect stakeholder input and provide an overview of NOAA Fisheries climate governance policy. And our objectives of the webinar for today, we decided to hold this webinar to provide an additional overview for stakeholders of the NIMS draft fisheries climate governance policy and to collect public comments on this issue to forward to NOAA Fisheries. This draft policy is a NOAA Fisheries procedural directive developed by NOAA Fisheries. This provides guidance pertaining to the application of a particular provision of the Magnuson-Stevens Act related to assigning management authority for fisheries that extend across more than one council jurisdiction. So NOAA Fisheries has requested comments from the regional councils on this draft policy, and our council decided to host this webinar to increase awareness of this draft policy and to provide an additional opportunity for public comment. So our intent with this webinar and with requesting any written comments that you or others may have is that we would provide the comments that we receive on this webinar today and any comments we receive in writing before November 10th. We would compile those comments and send them to NOAA Fisheries along with or in addition to our separate council letter. So I just have a presentation that's sort of going to walk through the background of this policy and an overview of the draft policy, and then we'll leave most of the time for questions and comments and discussion on this policy. So as a little bit of background about what this is about, under the Magnuson-Stevens Act, the 8 regional fishery management councils have responsibilities for fisheries within their geographic area that for any fisheries that require conservation and management. So in situations where a fishery extends beyond the geographic area of any one council, Magnuson Section 304F authorizes the Secretary of Commerce to either designate a council to prepare an FMP or require multiple relevant councils to prepare an FMP jointly. And in terms of the geographic area of a council, this is referring to the area of authority that's defined for each council in the federal regulations as shown in this figure. So typically NOAA Fisheries and the councils have addressed this issue on a case-by-case basis when developing an FMP, but this draft policy or draft guidance is intended to provide guidance on application of that provision of Magnuson 304F. And the draft policy specifically provides guidance on when the geographic scope of a fishery may be in need of review, how to determine the geographic scope of a fishery, and determining which council or councils will be responsible for new or existing FMPs for fisheries that are extending or moving beyond the geographic scope of any one council. And the purpose behind this is stated in the draft guidance is that there is an anticipation of an increasing number of fish stocks that are going to shift geographic distribution, new fisheries emerging, and other changes across council jurisdictions in the future, and that having an established process and guidance in place for addressing these situations provides a more transparent and responsive approach to management. So before covering the summary of the draft policy, one of the reasons that we're holding this webinar is the Mid-Atlantic Council is aware that as given our position along the East Coast and the number of stocks that exist or fisheries that exist across our council region boundaries, this policy is likely to have a fairly big impact on Mid-Atlantic Council management and Mid-Atlantic Council species. Based on the draft criteria that are in the document, we would anticipate that several of the council's managed species would be subject to frequent reviews of their geographic scope. This would not necessarily trigger a change in management responsibility, but just in terms of the review portion of the process, it could be frequent for our species. And then there is a possibility that it could trigger some changes in management authority for our managed species, including the potential for one or more species to be jointly managed with or fully transferred to the New England Fishery Management Council. Again, not a guarantee, but this is just looking at this policy. We think this is likely to have some big implications for Mid-Atlantic Council species. So on the next few slides, I'll provide an overview of the draft policy. This figure is taken from the draft procedural directive developed by NOAA Fisheries, illustrating the overall flow of their proposed process, which contains 4 steps. So I'll go over each of these in the next few slides, but just briefly, the first step is to determine whether to conduct or when to review the geographic scope of a fishery. And if a review is needed, step 2 is identify the geographic scope of the fishery. If this review determines that there is one fishery that is extending into areas of authority for more than one council, then you proceed to step 3, which is determining which council or councils are responsible for the fishery management plan. And then step 4, depending on the results of that designation step, step 4 may involve establishing new governance or transferring management authority. So I'll go over these steps in more detail over the next couple slides, starting with step 1, which is NIMS will consider whether to conduct a review of the geographic scope and or of the council authority. So based on the draft policy, NIMS will conduct a review if either certain criteria are met or upon request from a council. The criteria that are specified in the document as potentially indicating a need for review, NIMS indicates that they would use multi-year averages of some of these to prevent frequent transitions of management authority between councils. And then the indicators that they use specifically as examples in the document include indicators of significant change in the location of the fish stocks or of fishing effort, including but not limited to a shift of greater than 15% in the proportion of a fishery's revenue that occurs to another council's region, or a similar shift of 15% or more in the proportion of recreational effort that occurs in another council's region. Another indicator stated in the document is a documented shift in stock distribution. And the policy also states that certain council actions with cross-jurisdictional implications, such as allocation or permit requirement changes, would also trigger a review. For step 2, determining the geographic scope of a fishery, the policy states that this should consider both the location of the fish species and the location of fishing effort. Sorry, the data should be data listed on the, I'm going to talk about the data sources on 2 slides from now. The additional considerations for determining this step listed in the policy include the management goals and objectives of the existing FMPs, the need for conservation and management efficiency, biological considerations, including genetics, and infrastructure such as vessels, dealers, ports, and things like that. So those are considerations that would be given to determining the geographic scope of a fishery. And then timing wise, NOAA Fisheries may choose to give the relevant councils a period of up to 6 months from the date of notification to recommend how the geographic scope of the fisheries should be identified. So the potential outcomes of this step 2 in what is determined to be the geographic scope, those outcomes are listed here, including outcome 1 is there is one fishery in one council's area of authority. So that does not represent a jurisdictional problem. Outcome 2 is there are separate fisheries in multiple council areas of authority, and then each council would be responsible for the fisheries in its area of authority. And then outcome 3 is that there's one fishery extending into areas of authority for more than one council. And so according to the policy, this outcome 3 would be the outcome that leads you to proceed to step 3 of the policy, where you have one fishery that extends into the area of authority for more than one council. The data sources listed in the policy to be considered during steps 1 and 2. The list is the same, but in determining both whether a review is needed and determining the scope of the fishery, the policy notes that data sources could include things like stock assessments, fishery independent surveys, fishery dependent data sources, recreational catch and effort estimates, NOAA's DISMAP portal, traditional ecological knowledge, stakeholder provided information, and ecosystem status reports or similar products. Step 3 is the determination of which council or councils have management authority. And NOAA Fisheries during this step would consult with the relevant councils here and provide 6 months to recommend a designation unless a different schedule is required to comply with Magnuson requirements. So the possible determinations listed in the policy include 1 council, 1 FMP, the secretary designating 1 council to manage the fishery throughout its range. Designation 2 is multiple councils, 1 FMP, which would essentially be joint management with a single fishery management plan, which may include designating 1 council as the lead. Or designation 3, where you would have multiple councils and multiple FMPs. So in terms of how the determinations in step 3 are reached, the draft policy provides a long list of general considerations for how to make this decision. This is a condensed version of the list in the policy, and I'm not going to read all of these out, but they do include various pieces of information about management of the species, the stock's distribution, stakeholder representation, location of fishing activities and landings, the Magnuson National Standards, data availability, and other factors. So a lot of different considerations that could go into the NOAA Fisheries determination of which council or councils should manage the fishery. And also pertaining to the determination in step 3, in addition to those general considerations shown on the previous slide, the policy also contains a list of presumptions pertaining to designations. So as with the initial review criteria, they might use multi-year averages here for these metrics, but the presumptions state that if more than 75% of a fisheries landings revenue accrues to or recreational effort occurs in another council's jurisdiction, there is a presumption that NOAA Fisheries will assign or reassign management authority to the other council. If 40 to 75% of landings revenue or recreational fishing effort occurs in another council's jurisdiction, the presumption is joint management or assigning multiple councils to develop multiple FMPs. And then a third presumption that is sort of in draft form indicates that if data from non-fishery dependent sources indicate that somewhere between 15 and 75% distribution changes in biomass distribution, then the draft policy is seeking input on how to establish a presumption there. So it's some combination of those general considerations on the previous slide and these presumptions will be used to determine the authority of the appropriate council or councils. And then step 4 of the policy includes steps to transition to revised council authority if necessary. So if a change is determined necessary from the previous step, the policy states that at least 2 years should be provided as a transition period. And during this time, the existing FMP and regulations should remain in place until they're superseded by the new responsible council or councils. However, it's important that the fishery would also remain compliant with Magnuson and other applicable laws during this time. And then during the phase-in, there's a presumption that no modifications to allocations or permitting could take place during that time. And that should be the responsibility of the new management bodies that are responsible under the revised designation. There are some additional considerations in the policy about how to mitigate disruptions related to a transfer of authority to the degree practicable, including providing for adequate knowledge transfer and staffing transfer, including between the regional offices and science centers if necessary, and then also to have a plan for addressing data collection, storage, and access issues. So that is a overview of the draft policy document that is also linked on the webpage for this event. The council has each Regional Fish Management Council has been requested to provide comments on this draft procedural directive by November 17th. And it is our understanding that NOAA Fisheries has the goal of finalizing and implementing this policy by next summer. So we've been working to develop our comments at the Mid-Atlantic Council, and I know many other councils are working on their comments as well. There was a joint comment letter submitted by the Council Coordination Committee, which consists of all 8 regional fishery management councils. That joint comment letter was submitted in early October, and the CCC also at their meeting last week did pass a motion recommending that NIMS engage the councils and the CCC on the development of a revised policy, given some of the concerns that the CCC raised in their letter. And again, we are working on developing Mid-Atlantic Council specific comments, and we've had a number of meetings to discuss that with our council and our SSC. And on today's webinar, we are seeking additional stakeholder input to be forwarded to NIMS to provide increased comments from our stakeholders. And as I mentioned previously, any comments provided on today's webinar will be compiled and submitted to NIMS. And you can also send us any written comments you may have by November 10th. And if we receive those by that date, we can forward those to NIMS as well. So we set up an online comment form, and the link is on our website and on the slide, or you can also email Mary Sabo at the email address here. And so we do have a page dedicated to this on our website with more background information and previous presentations and comments and documents for additional info. So that's all I have for the presentation. And I think, we'd like to spend the rest of the time just taking some questions. Since this is not our policy, we would do our best to provide our council perspective on the draft policy, but this is not something that was drafted by Mid-Atlantic Council staff. So we'll do our best to answer questions. And then we would like to hear from all of you if you have comments on this policy that we could provide to NOAA Fisheries. Brandon or Mary, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I don't. I think that was a very good comprehensive summary of our understanding of the policy, and we look forward to hearing what folks have to say on the webinar.
Agreed. Same thing as Mary. Yep. Perfect.
All right. I'll go based on, if you have the ability to raise your hand on the webinar, please do that. That'll help us keep track of who wants to speak. If you are having trouble raising your hand, please just speak up if there's an opportunity to do that. I see Greg DiDomenico, you have your hand raised, and then Megan Lapp. Go ahead, Greg.
Thank you, Kylie. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Is there any way to incorporate stock status or whether or not there is a OFL or, accepted assessment for a particular species? Can we somehow recommend that that be in the decision-making process? Because I feel that for a species with either undergoing overfishing or it's overfished, or for a fishery that lacks stock status, perhaps those should be disqualified. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, we could certainly pass that on as a comment. I think within the draft, there are a number of considerations listed in a couple of the steps to take into account things that I think could be interpreted to include that. But yes, definitely a comment we can include. Megan, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Kylie. So we're taking questions and comments right now?
Yeah, I think we could do questions and comments at the same time. Sure.
Okay. So one of the things that I've looked at, albeit I haven't had the opportunity to dig too deeply into the document, is that it talks about using like sets of 3-year averages, like to kind of compare and contrast as far as like the baseline for reviewing a lot of these triggers that you had mentioned. And, really, okay, so you have a 3-year average and then you compare it, and then if one of the triggers is reached, they go ahead and redesignate. But during that time, there's a 2-year period where no regulations other than apparently specs are allowed to go forward. And if you really think about that, then that means that there will virtually be no management. You know, an amendment, a lot of the time takes like 3 years to actually do. And then it would switch jurisdictions. You can't implement it for 2 years. And then by the time, you know, the next authority would start doing anything, it could be flip-flopping back again. And you could be in perpetual states of non-management, essentially. And that, I think, is a real problem, because I think one of the underlying issues with this entire thing is that it predicates the entire document on stocks are shifting from one place to another, and there's a need to reassign jurisdictional authority over it from one place to another. But I think that really ignores the fact that, at least in the Garfo region, there's been overlap for many, many stocks since all of the council FMPs were put in at the beginning. You know, say things like fluke, scup, sea bass, squid, you know, those have always had fisheries in southern New England, but they're managed by the mid, but they've always been cross-jurisdictional. And that, you know, but whenever that was put in initially, you know, the various councils were assigned jurisdiction. Same things like with scallops. Scallops have always been in the Mid-Atlantic and New England, but the decision was made, you know, that New England would manage scallops. And so I think that's a flaw in the basis, I think, of the document. Because in our region, I mean, it's Garfo, it's a greater Atlantic region, right? So one more thing I will say is that the shift of 15% of a proportion of fisheries landings revenue as a trigger for, you know, reassignment, I think that is very, very misguided and actually gives perverse incentives to try to land certain fish in certain places if it means that can trigger a review. I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks.
Thanks, Megan. I am not seeing any additional hands raised right now. Greg, you have a comment?
Thank you, Kylie. Can you go back to your slide where it talked about the licensing process or permitting process?
Yeah, let me find that. Are you talking about the transition step, or were you talking about the certain council actions that might trigger a review?
I think it was in the council actions.
So this slide indicates that certain council actions with cross-jurisdictional implications, like allocation changes, may trigger a review of geographic scope. Is this what you were asking about?
It was regarding permitting. I don't see it here. Perhaps it was just something you said.
Yeah, let's see. It could be the transition step states that no modifications to allocations or permitting should occur during the transition phase.
Okay. Thank you. I think that clarifies it. Thank you, Kylie.
Okay. All right, Greg, if you're all set, then Bonnie Brady.
Hear me?
Bonnie, you broke
Can
up
you
a
hear
little bit
me?
there.
How about now? Better?
Still breaking up a little bit. It was slightly better.
Super. Try to move around the room for somebody else and I'll come back. Thanks. How about now? Any better?
That sounds better.
Okay, we'll give it a shot. Yeah. God, what haven't I said already? Can you go back? I missed the entire presentation. I'm just trying to play catch up right now. This is based on the Climate Ready Fisheries Workshop also has a process in this. Is this why the council, sorry, why the feds are looking to expand the scope or change authority for various fisheries to different councils? What, can you just tell me if the Climate Ready Fisheries has any part in this whole thing?
Are you meaning NOAA Fisheries Climate Ready Initiative?
Correct.
That I'm not sure. I don't know if Mary or Brandon, if you have any insight on that, but I don't know that we have gotten that kind of background on this.
Okay. I think it's this separate issue then for New York, which I've mentioned frequently and often, is the issue, of course, is for New York, for example, with fluke or with sea bass, because of inadequate quotas based on FMPs, we've had to purchase permits for different states in order to be able to take those regulatory discard and turn them into landings. And yet every time I've said, well, what about New York? We've got these permits, and then somehow if they go to a different governing system, somehow that, what about the value of the permits that we've already accrued? And the response that I was told at the time by Garfo, by Mike Penny, is, oh, well, we'll do flexible landings. Well, that's not a solution that would work and provide any value to New York fishermen if, when we only have one market and not processing, that we can't bring that to market. And there's no talk about at least compensating fishermen at all for the costs involved in having to purchase permits from different states if we hand off to a different council with somehow a different method. It seems to not only devalue the money that New York has put into acquiring these different permits, but not only that, northern states are getting a free pass to not have to just go, put out money for the permit and be done with it. Those are very large concerns. Can you tell me as far as and when the date is for written comments? I saw that just as I was getting on a meeting. It's, is it November or October? What is that date?
So NIMS has requested comments from the councils by November 17th and has also provided a way for folks to message them or send them comments directly. But in terms of if you want what we are requesting from the Mid-Atlantic Council, if you want comments sent to us and forwarded through the Mid-Atlantic Council, that would be November 10th.
Okay, and I saw that link too. I think it's that 11-page document to be able to get that to you all by that date.
I'm sorry, could you,
The
which document?
whatever it was on the actual website, I just had seen it there. There is the guidance on council authority for preparing fishery management plans for stocks that may extend across geographical areas of more than one council pursuant. Okay, and
that's the draft policy that is the NOAA Fisheries draft policy, and we also have set up an online comment form if you want to provide comments that way.
okay, and is that purely by written email, or is there a phone option for guys to call in or anything like that?
We set up a comment form and we have an email option as well, shown on the slide, but if you would prefer to give verbal comments, you could call either me or Mary or Brandon, and we'd be happy to write down those comments from you, similar to what we're doing today.
Similar for fluke, for back in for the allocation issue. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Bonnie. That's okay. Any additional comments or questions? Not seeing any hands raised at the moment. Bonnie, go ahead.
Is there ability to have another, and I'm sorry, like I said, I jumped on late, another webinar in the evening so that guys that are actually out fishing can follow and either comment directly during this period in addition to the opportunities that you have listed or that you've also said to me?
I'm not sure about that. We'd have to talk about that. I think that might be a little bit tight with a requirement to put that in the Federal Register before we need to have all these comments compiled. We could talk about that.
Or if there was the ability, like you've done for other issues, you guys did a YouTube video. I remember Julia Beatty did those. And so that way you could go to the link and you could record it over so that guys could go hit it and listen to that specifically in addition to through reading the document, through sending an email, through, you know, this format is very accessible sometimes for fishermen. So it might be something that at least through the communication group, put it on the council's website so that the YouTube page so that they could review it prior to making their comments. There goes Mary's hand as if on cue.
Right. Yeah, we can definitely get this presentation from today posted on YouTube so that folks can watch that and then either email, use the online form, or call us if that works better for them.
Yeah, with the audio, I guess, of Kylie going over the entire thing. The thing that I missed, maybe I should be watching it first. Thanks.
Yeah, we can make that happen. I'll let you know when it's up.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Okay, any additional comments, questions? Not seeing any hands raised. Anybody, Megan Lapp? Another comment?
Yeah, well, kind of like a question. So I'm scrolling through the document right now, and the outcome 3 that you had discussed, where it says there's one fishery that extends into areas of authority for more than one council. NOAA Fisheries may designate a council or councils to be responsible for developing an FMP. If this is the outcome, proceed to step 3. And then the step 3 is designation of, you know, who manages it. And it says if NOAA Fisheries determines that one fishery extends beyond the geographic jurisdiction of a single council, the agency will designate one or more councils to be responsible for preparing or amending the FMP. So, like, that means that everything that's in southern New England would continually just be in flux, if I'm reading this right. In southern New England, we're at the, you know, the confluence of both the Mid-Atlantic and the New England councils. And if I'm reading this correctly, just the fact that those fisheries extend or cross the borders of both councils, which, as I had mentioned before, they always have, we could just be in a constant state of, you know, depending on the political flavor of the month, we could have a redesignation like every 3 years potentially. And I don't know if that's the way, you know, the Mid-Atlantic Council reads it or the New England Council reads it or whoever does, but as I'm reading it, that's what it looks like to me. And that creates a lot of uncertainty. And I don't know if the agency, you know, obviously they want to get something done by the end of 2024. They've said that multiple times. I don't know if they have given an indication of, you know, kind of what their preferred, you know, landing point is with all of this, but if they have, that might be helpful to inform the public with. Not like you guys can do that, but thanks.
Thanks, Megan. Yeah, certainly things that have come up in previous discussions on this. Just the possibility is, like you mentioned earlier, there are a lot of fisheries that do extend, particularly across the Mid-Atlantic and New England regions, that there's a potential for having pretty frequent reviews of those, of the geographic scope of those fisheries and potentially consideration of new designations. So it's definitely come up in the conversations at the Mid-Atlantic Council around this. Bonnie?
Hi, I guess, on what page is this? Page 7, the proposed process, yeah, here, no, yes, proposed process, step 1, and the breakdown. If that's not page 7, it shows as page 7 on my phone. NIMS will conduct a review. Now, quote, indicators of, quote, significant change in the location of stocks or fishing effort, for example, a greater than 15% shift in landings revenue or recreational effort by region. So if you could humor me, Kylie, first of all, 15%, like Megan said, doesn't really seem like a lot, but landings revenue for New York in certain situations, like for Fluke, would obviously perhaps stay in the area of the mid, but for something like squid, there's a whole lot of processing in Rhode Island, but that fish that are landed are then, let me see if I understand this straight. So by landing it in Rhode Island, therefore it's looked at as Rhode Island landings only, even if a New York boat does it because of processing, right? There's no, I mean, New York has zero processing. Obviously, we know New Jersey does. But so being able to go to a different processor, what happens if you landed in New York and say a processor comes to pick it up in New York and take it to Rhode Island? That would then be considered New York landings, correct?
So I guess those are the kind of details about exactly how this kind of evaluation would be done that I don't think we can really answer. I mean, all that's in the document is
Right, but these are the
landing.
types of things that you would like in addition to work through that and to submit by the 10th. Also, I have a question. Rec effort by region. So if commercial landings for species X were strategically purely only in the mid, but for some freakish reason, the rec effort by region was in New England, could the rec effort alone change a fishing, what is considered the council that would be in charge? Is that what is something, another question to be had? Is that what they're saying? It's kind of left there, and so that we have to interpret it as we do. Am I on the right track there?
Yeah, correct. I don't think we really have an answer to that and that's something that's come up in our previous discussions of this and with the SSC review, that there is not really an indication of how diverging indicators will be dealt with. So if you have the rec fishery going one way and the commercial going the other way, how that's dealt with. And I think so there's no real explicit detail in the policy about what happens in that case.
Super. Okay, thank you.
Did you have any additional questions or comments, Bonnie?
Not at the moment. I'm just running through this, so thanks.
Mm-hmm. All right, anybody else? Other questions or comments?
I do have one other question. Also for consideration and for comments, because they refer to a 15% change. And obviously, we know from our fun times at BOEM, which years they pick for fishing effort can show drastically different conclusions. I'm assuming that's something that has not been really determined or discussed as to how they would come up upon that 15% change, correct? Or what years they would use?
Yes, I think that's, I think the intent was there are some examples in the document of, for example, comparing two recent 3-year timeframes, but our understanding is that was just put in there to serve as an example and not to be prescriptive. So there are not a lot of details about exactly how you would make those revenue or those fishing effort comparisons.
Okay,
And I
thanks.
think that they're trying to, there's some, yeah, there's room for interpretation, I guess, on how you conduct that review process. I'll leave it at that.
Great, thank you. One more, then I'll promise I might stop. Can I?
Go ahead.
Traditional knowledge. What, pray tell, are they meaning? Because often we've spoken about fisheries and fishermen's historical traditional knowledge and it's gotten kicked. But if it was a tribe, then therefore it's accepted. Do we know there's no definition as to traditional? Or is there perhaps, I could read the document. If that's in the document, just tell me. Thanks.
I don't believe it is spelled out in the document what exactly that's referring to. There may be definitions elsewhere that might apply here, but I don't know that it's exactly defined in this document.
Okay, all right, thank you.
All right, anyone else? Not seeing any hands raised. Okay, since I'm not seeing any additional hands raised or hearing anyone with additional comments, I think we could go ahead and end it at that, unless Mary, Brandon, do you have anything to add or?
No, this was a lot of good questions and comments raised today, and I would encourage anyone who's listening in to consider providing written comments either through the council or directly to NOAA Fisheries. And just want to say thanks again to everyone who took the time to be here.
Yes, thanks everyone for your comments, and feel free to reach out to me or Mary or Brandon if you have additional questions or comments. And again, I'll put up the link here to submit comments or email to Mary is in the presentation and on our website at this page for additional info and documents. So thanks everyone for taking the time to participate today.
Thank you very much.